Imagine a world where knowledge flowed like water, where cities glowed not from gold, but from the light of books, and where the pen was more powerful than any sword. But what if I told you many of those treasures vanished, burned, drowned, or stolen forever? The Lost Libraries of the Islamic Golden Age. Part 1. A Civilization of Books. Let's go back to a time when the heart of the Muslim world beat not with war drums, but with the turning of pages. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, what we now call the Islamic Golden Age was a dazzling period when intellectual curiosity was not just encouraged, it was sacred. This wasn't just an age of religion, it was an age of reason, translation, and transformation. It all began in Baghdad under the Abbasid Caliphate. The Caliph Harun al-Rashid, and later his son al-Ma'mun, envisioned a society where scholars were as honored as generals. They established Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. But don't let the name fool you. It wasn't just a library, it was the world's first real research institute. Here, Greek, Persian, Indian, and even Chinese texts were translated into Arabic. But the scholars didn't stop there. They challenged, refined, and expanded these ideas. They didn't just preserve knowledge, they built upon it. Think about it. While Europe was struggling through the Dark Ages, Muslim astronomers were mapping the stars, naming constellations still used today. Mathematicians like Al-Khwarizmi laid the foundations of algebra. The word algebra itself comes from his book, Al-Jabr. Physicians like Ibn Sina wrote encyclopedias of medicine used in Europe for 500 years. Philosophers like Al-Farabi and Ibn Rushd revived and interpreted Aristotle for the world. And what fueled all this? Libraries. Not just one or two, but hundreds. Private libraries, palace libraries, mosque libraries, and public libraries across the Islamic world. In Cordoba, Spain, then ruled by Muslim emirs, the Royal Library reportedly held over 400,000 books. To put that in perspective, the largest library in Christian Europe at the time had fewer than 1,000 volumes. Cairo's Library of al-Hakim was another intellectual wonder, with over 1.6 million manuscripts. And in cities like Nishapur, Bokhara, and Fez, literacy rates were so high that even ordinary people had access to books. This wasn't just elite knowledge, it was a culture of books, where calligraphy was an art and scholarship was a spiritual pursuit. In this world, books were more valuable than gold. Copyists would spend years transcribing a single work. Scholars would travel across deserts for one rare manuscript. Knowledge wasn't just power, it was worship. This was the Islamic world at its intellectual height, a civilization that translated the past, discovered the present, and imagined the future through ink and parchment. Part 2: The Fall and the Fires. No civilization shines forever. And just as the Islamic world reached the height of its intellectual power, a darkness began to creep in, not from within, but from beyond its borders. The year was 1258. The Mongols, led by Hulagu Khan, descended upon the heart of the Islamic world, Baghdad. At the time, Baghdad wasn't just a city. It was a symbol of knowledge, a place where science, faith, and philosophy coexisted. It was the home of Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, the crown jewel of Islamic intellectualism. But within days, it became a graveyard. The Mongol siege was brutal. They slaughtered hundreds of thousands, from scholars to civilians. The once bustling streets were filled with corpses. But perhaps the most devastating blow was not just the loss of life, but the destruction of knowledge. Bayt al-Hikmah, with its rare manuscripts and ancient scrolls, was completely destroyed. Legend says the invaders hurled thousands of books into the Tigris River. The ink from the manuscripts was so vast, it said the waters ran black for days. Other sources describe how the river ran red, soaked with the blood of Baghdad's scholars and scribes. This was more than a military victory, it was a cultural catastrophe. But Baghdad wasn't the only victim. In Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, centuries of peaceful coexistence between Muslims, Christians, and Jews had created a multicultural intellectual utopia. Cities like Cordoba, Toledo, and Granada were rich with libraries, universities, and poetry. But after the Christian Reconquista, Muslim rule collapsed. And with it, so did the libraries. In 1499, under Cardinal Jiménez de Cisneros, Tens of thousands of Arabic books were burned in the public squares of Granada. The works of Avicenna, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Arabi, gone in flames. Knowledge that took centuries to build was erased in hours. And the destruction didn't end in the medieval period. Later, during the colonial era, European powers looted libraries, confiscated manuscripts, and shipped priceless texts back to their own institutions. Many of these texts now sit in museums and archives across Europe, often without proper acknowledgement or context. Some manuscripts were lost not to war, but to time, rotting in basements, eaten by insects, or decaying from neglect. We're not just talking about books. We're talking about the blueprints of civilization, medical discoveries, astronomical charts, theological debates, maps, poetry, philosophy, all gone. The fall of these libraries was not just the loss of pages. It was the loss of potential of what could have been. The scientific revolutions that never happened. The minds that were never inspired. The future that was never born. Part 3: What we lost. When the fires died down, and the rivers ran clear again, the silence that followed wasn't just the absence of voices. It was the absence of ideas. Because what burned in Baghdad, what was buried in Andalusia, what was scattered across deserts and empires, was not just paper and ink. It was our future. For every manuscript that was destroyed, an entire branch of human knowledge may have been lost. We lost treatises on astronomy that charted the stars with astonishing precision centuries before European telescopes. We lost surgical manuals and medical texts that described diseases, diagnoses, and treatments that modern scholars are still rediscovering today. We lost volumes on philosophy, logic, metaphysics, and ethics, books that once bridged Greek, Indian, and Islamic thought into a unique and nuanced worldview. We lost engineering designs, water systems, clocks, maps, and tools, creations born of experimentation and mathematics. But we also lost something deeper. We lost the intellectual confidence of a civilization that once led the world in critical thinking. We lost the dialogue between cultures and faiths, which Islamic libraries had once nurtured. And perhaps most tragically, we lost the continuity of knowledge. Ideas don't just live in books. They live when one generation builds upon another. When texts are passed on, studied, questioned, rewritten, improved. When the libraries burned, that chain was broken. And so we ask, what would the world look like today if those books had survived? Would we have reached the Renaissance earlier? Would medical cures have been found sooner? Would the modern world look different? The Islamic Golden Age wasn't just about Muslims preserving old texts. It was about transforming knowledge, blending East and West, faith and reason, theory and practice. It was a moment when the world said, "Let us learn from everywhere and everyone." That spirit is what was lost. And yet, fragments remain. A few rare manuscripts survived, hidden in private homes, sealed in underground libraries, or preserved by dedicated scholars. Some were smuggled to safety, others copied by hand, generation after generation. Today, a few of these treasures live on in places like the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, the British Library in London, or private collections across the Middle East. But they are only shadows of what once was. When a library is burned, we don't just lose what was written. We lose what could have been written, what could have been discovered, what could have been shared with the world. Part 4, but all is not lost. Yes, much was lost, but not everything. From the ashes of the burned libraries, from the scattered pages and broken shelves, something extraordinary has begun to rise. A new generation not defined by what was destroyed, but inspired by what still remains. Because not all knowledge was wiped away. Some manuscripts survived, hidden in clay jars, passed down secretly through families, or locked away in private collections for centuries. Others were copied by devoted scribes who refused to let knowledge die. And today, across the Muslim world and beyond, a movement has begun. A movement to recover, digitize, translate, and revive the wisdom of the past. In Istanbul, Cairo, Fez, Tehran, and Timbuktu, libraries and archives are now carefully restoring ancient texts. Organizations like the Qatar Digital Library, the Al-Furqan Foundation, and the Digital Library of the Middle East are scanning fragile manuscripts and putting them online free for the world to read. What was once guarded in palaces and madrasas is now accessible from smartphones and laptops. From Dhaka to Detroit, Jakarta to Johannesburg. And beyond preservation, there is renewed curiosity. Muslim youth around the world are once again asking, who were our scientists? What did our philosophers believe? How did our scholars change the world? They are no longer waiting for others to tell the story of the Islamic Golden Age. They are telling it themselves. And this is where you come in. By remembering this legacy, by watching this video, by sharing this story, you are reviving the spirit of the libraries. You see, the greatest tragedy isn't that knowledge was lost. The greatest tragedy would be if we forgot it ever existed. Every time we speak about Bayt al-Hikmah, every time we mention the libraries of Cordoba, Cairo, or Baghdad, every time a young mind opens a book to learn about Ibn Sina, Al-Khwarizmi, Fatima al-Fihri, or al-Jazari, the light of the Golden Age flickers back to life. This is not just history. This is a call to action. We may never recover every manuscript, every poem, every scientific chart, but we can rebuild something even greater, a culture that honors knowledge, seeks truth, and values learning, just as our ancestors did. Because as long as we preserve the memory, as long as we carry the story forward, the lost libraries will never truly be lost. They tried to silence knowledge with fire and sword, but knowledge has a voice, and it speaks through us. The libraries may be gone, but their spirit isn't. As long as we seek knowledge, as long as we honor truth, the light of the Golden Age will never be truly lost.